Long before roads were ploughed, before weather forecasts warned of approaching storms, and before warmth could be summoned with the push of a button, winter arrived like a silent predator. For many Native American tribes, winter was not a season, it was a trial of endurance. The cold did not simply inconvenience life, it threatened to erase it. In vast regions of North America, snow fell endlessly, winds cut through the land like blades, and darkness stretched for long, unforgiving nights. Temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin could freeze in minutes, and a single mistake could mean death. In these frozen landscapes, survival depended on something far more powerful than firewood, because in many places, firewood barely existed. On the northern plains, in the Arctic tundra, and across open regions where trees were rare or completely absent, there were no forests to rely on. No stacks of logs waited to be chopped, no crackling fires burned through the night to keep families warm. The environment offered no mercy, and nature made no exceptions. Winter came every year, relentless and unavoidable. For modern minds, the idea of surviving such conditions without firewood seems impossible. Fire represents safety, warmth, and life itself. But for Native Americans, survival was never about forcing the land to obey their needs. It was about understanding the land so deeply that life could continue even when conditions seemed unbearable. Winter was expected, prepared for, and respected. It was feared, yes, but it was never underestimated. Blizzards could arrive without warning, swallowing entire landscapes in white silence. Paths disappeared, hunting became dangerous, food grew scarce, the cold crept into bones and joints, testing the strength of the young and the resilience of the old. Every breath felt sharper, heavier, as icy air filled the lungs. Nights were especially deadly. Without proper protection, sleep itself could become fatal. The cold did not rest, and neither could the people who lived within it. In these harsh winters, death was always close. Children, elders, and the sick were most vulnerable. Frostbite could steal fingers and toes. Hypothermia could quietly claim lives before dawn, yet generation after generation endured. This was not luck. It was the result of knowledge refined over centuries, passed down through stories, practice, and lived experience. Winter survival was a skill taught from childhood, not a challenge discovered too late. Fire, when available, was never taken for granted. It was precious, fragile, and limited. In many regions, even gathering fuel meant long journeys across frozen ground, risking exposure and exhaustion. Fires were small, controlled, and used with intention. They were never relied upon as the sole source of warmth, because the people knew fire could fail. Wind could extinguish it. Fuel could run out. Depending entirely on fire was a risk no wise survivor would take. Instead, Native Americans learned to see winter differently. Cold was not just an enemy. It was a condition to be navigated. The land itself became a teacher. Snow showed how wind moved. Ice revealed safe paths and dangerous traps. Animal behavior signaled changing weather. Every detail mattered, because missing even one sign could mean disaster. Winter demanded discipline. Movement slowed, energy was conserved. Decisions were made carefully, knowing mistakes carried greater consequences in the cold. Survival was not about bravery, it was about patience and foresight. People stayed close to shelter. They avoided unnecessary travel. They worked together, understanding that isolation was one of winter's greatest killers. What made these winters especially deadly was their length. Cold did not last days or weeks. It lasted months. Food stores had to survive until spring. Bodies had to remain strong through endless darkness. Morale had to endure when the sun barely rose and storms howled outside for days at a time. Hope itself became a survival tool. Despite all this, life continued. Children were born. Stories were told, traditions were honored. Winter did not stop culture, it shaped it. Songs, rituals, and oral histories carried lessons about endurance, reminding each generation that their ancestors had survived the same cold, the same storms, the same silence. The true danger of winter was not just freezing temperatures, but complacency. Native Americans understood this deeply. They never assumed safety. Preparation began long before the first snow fell. Every action during warmer months was influenced by the knowledge that winter was coming, and it would test everyone equally. These brutal winters were unforgiving, but they were not unbeatable. Native Americans endured them not through dominance, but through adaptation. They survived not because nature spared them, but because they learned how to live within its limits. Winter was harsh, merciless, and deadly, but it was also a reminder of human resilience, wisdom, and the power of living in balance with the world. And when the snow finally melted and the land breathed again, survival itself became a story worth passing on, proof that even the harshest winters could be endured without firewood, when knowledge, discipline, and respect for nature guided every step. When firewood was scarce or completely unavailable, warmth could not come from flames. It had to come from intelligence, design, and a deep understanding of how heat behaves. For Native American tribes facing brutal winters, shelter was not simply a place to sleep. It was the first and strongest line of defense against death. Every wall, every layer, every shape served a purpose. These homes were not built for comfort alone, they were built to trap life itself. Across the northern plains and river valleys, earth lodges rose quietly from the ground, blending into the landscape rather than standing against it. These structures were dug partially underground, where the earth naturally maintained a more stable temperature. While the air above froze and winds screamed across the open land, the soil below remained comparatively warm. Native Americans understood this long before science gave it a name. The ground was insulation, and they used it wisely. Wooden frames formed the skeleton of these lodges, but they were never left exposed. Thick layers of grass, reeds, mud, and packed earth were added on top, creating walls that could be several feet thick. These layers slowed the escape of heat and blocked the invasion of cold air. Once inside, the difference was immediate. The deadly chill of the outside world faded into a steady, survivable warmth, created not by fire, but by trapped heat and human presence. The shape of these homes mattered just as much as the materials. Rounded or dome-like designs reduced exposed surface area, limiting how much cold could penetrate. Sharp corners, which allow heat to escape more easily, were avoided. Entrances were often small and low, forcing anyone entering to crouch. This design reduced heat loss and blocked direct wind from rushing inside. Even movement was controlled by architecture. In regions where snow dominated the landscape, another remarkable solution emerged: the igloo. To outsiders, building a home from snow seems like madness. Snow appears cold, fragile, and weak. But the Inuit understood something vital. Snow is filled with trapped air, and trapped air is an excellent insulator. Blocks of compacted snow were cut carefully and stacked in a spiral, forming a strong dome capable of withstanding fierce winds. Inside an igloo, the temperature could rise dramatically compared to the outside world. Body heat alone, combined with oil lamps when available, could raise interior temperatures well above freezing. The snow walls prevented heat from escaping while blocking brutal Arctic winds. The entrance tunnel was built lower than the living area, allowing cold air to sink away from where people slept. Nothing was accidental. Everything had a reason. Animal hides played a critical role inside these shelters. Floors were covered with thick furs to prevent cold from seeping upward. Walls were lined with skins to add another layer of insulation. Sleeping platforms were raised off the ground, protecting bodies from direct contact with frozen earth or ice. People did not sleep flat against the floor, they slept strategically. Ventilation was also carefully controlled. A shelter too sealed could trap moisture and smoke, creating new dangers. Small openings allowed airflow without sacrificing warmth. Managing heat was a balance, and Native Americans mastered it. They understood that survival meant controlling the environment inside when the outside could not be controlled. Mobility mattered as well. Many tribes lived seasonally, moving as resources changed. Their shelters were designed to be constructed efficiently with materials found nearby. Nothing was wasted. The land provided what was needed, and people took only what they could carry or rebuild. Winter homes were not monuments, they were solutions. Perhaps most importantly, these shelters were shared spaces. Families lived together, sometimes multiple generations under one roof. Shared body heat increased warmth. Proximity strengthened bonds. In winter, isolation was dangerous, but togetherness was protection. The home became a living organism, warmed by breath, movement, and life itself. The effectiveness of these shelters proved that survival was not about battling winter head-on. It was about working with natural forces. Earth, snow, grass, hides, materials that seemed simple became life-saving technology when used with knowledge and care. These homes did not fight the cold, they outsmarted it. Through these structures, Native Americans turned the harshest environments into livable spaces. They transformed frozen land into refuge and darkness into shelter. Their homes were quiet lessons in adaptation, proving that warmth does not always come from fire, but from understanding how to build in harmony with the world. In the deepest winter nights, while storms raged outside and temperatures plunged beyond human tolerance, families slept safely inside these shelters. Not because winter was kind, but because human wisdom had learned how to endure it. In a world where winter could kill within hours, clothing was not decoration or status, it was survival. For Native American tribes living through the harshest winters, what they wore often determined whether they lived to see spring. Every garment was the result of careful observation, trial, and generations of knowledge passed down through experience. Clothing was engineered, not chosen, and warmth was created through skill rather than fire. Animal hides were the foundation of winter clothing, but they were never used in their raw form. The process of preparing a hide could take weeks. Skins were scraped clean, stretched, smoked, and softened until they became flexible yet durable. This preparation removed moisture and prevented stiffness, ensuring that garments remained functional even in freezing conditions. A poorly prepared hide could become rigid and dangerous in the cold, but Native Americans understood how to make leather that moved with the body. Fur was used with intention. In extreme cold, garments were worn with the fur facing inward, trapping warm air close to the skin. This layer of trapped air acted as a natural barrier against the cold, reducing heat loss and shielding the body from wind. Outer layers were often made from smooth hide, allowing snow to slide off rather than melt and soak in. Staying dry was just as important as staying warm, because moisture could turn deadly in freezing temperatures. Layering was another crucial principle. Rather than relying on one heavy garment, multiple layers were worn to create pockets of insulating air. Inner layers focused on warmth, while outer layers focused on protection from wind, snow, and ice. This system allowed people to adjust as needed, preventing overheating during activity and conserving warmth during rest. It was a sophisticated approach, long before modern thermal wear existed. Seams were sewn with extraordinary care. Native Americans used sinew, strong fibers taken from animal tendons, to stitch garments together. Sinew tightened when wet, sealing seams and preventing cold air from slipping inside. Unlike modern thread, it did not easily break in the cold. Stitching patterns were designed to reduce gaps and reinforce stress points, ensuring clothing remained intact through long winters of use. Different regions required different solutions. In Arctic areas, parkas were designed with large hoods trimmed with fur. These hoods created a small pocket of warmer air around the face, protecting skin from frostbite and reducing heat loss from breathing. The fur around the hood disrupted wind flow, preventing icy air from cutting directly across exposed skin. Mittens were preferred over gloves, as fingers shared warmth more effectively when kept together. Footwear was equally vital. Frozen ground could steal heat faster than cold air. Moccasins and boots were lined with fur or grass insulation, keeping feet warm and dry. Soles were designed to provide traction on snow and ice while remaining flexible. Wet or frozen feet could end a journey or a life, so footwear was constantly monitored, dried when possible, and repaired immediately if damaged. Children learned early how to dress, for winter elders taught them which garments to wear in different conditions, how to recognize early signs of cold injury, and how to adjust layers while traveling or resting. Clothing knowledge was survival knowledge. It was taught through demonstration and repetition, not written instruction. Clothing also reflected movement and lifestyle. Hunters needed garments that allowed flexibility without sacrificing warmth. Long journeys required durability. Every piece was balanced between protection and mobility. Heavy clothing that restricted movement could be just as dangerous as clothing that failed to insulate. Repair and maintenance were constant. A torn seam or worn edge could allow cold air inside, leading to frostbite or hypothermia. People carried tools and materials to fix clothing in the field. Nothing was disposable. Garments were valued, repaired, passed down, and repurposed. When a hide became too worn to wear, it might become bedding or insulation. Perhaps most remarkable was how clothing worked to get her with the body. Native Americans understood how heat was generated through movement and food. Clothing was designed to preserve that heat, not replace it. It worked in harmony with shelter, diet, and activity, forming a complete system of winter survival. In these frozen environments, clothing was a silent guardian. It allowed people to hunt, travel, and live when the land was locked in ice. Without firewood, without modern materials, Native Americans survived because they learned how to wear warmth instead of burning it. Their clothing was proof that survival does not always come from technology, but from understanding nature and responding with intelligence. Each stitch, each layer, each fur-lined hood told a story of resilience, a story written not in words, but in the lives that endured the cold. In the heart of winter, when the land lay frozen and movement became dangerous, food was more than sustenance. It was heat, strength, and life itself. For Native American tribes enduring long, unforgiving winters without reliable firewood, survival depended heavily on what had been prepared months earlier. The body could not fight the cold on empty reserves. Warmth had to be generated from within, and food was the fuel that made this possible. During the warmer seasons, every hunt, harvest, and gathering was guided by the knowledge that winter would return. Nothing was taken lightly. Animals were hunted not just for immediate consumption, but for long-term survival. Meat was dried in the sun or smoked over controlled fires, transforming it into lightweight, durable food that could last for months. This dried meat, when combined with rendered fat and sometimes berries, became pemmican, a dense, high-energy food capable of sustaining people through extreme cold. Pemmican was not just food, it was survival technology. Rich in fat and protein, it provided the calories necessary to keep the body generating heat. In freezing conditions, fat was especially valuable. The body burned it slowly, producing sustained warmth and energy. A small amount of pemmican could fuel long journeys across snow-covered land or sustain a person during days of limited activity. Fish, too, played a critical role. In regions near rivers, lakes, and coasts, fish were dried or frozen naturally in the cold air. Smoked fish could be stored safely and eaten throughout winter. Like meat, fish provided essential nutrients that strengthened the body against illness and fatigue. Strong bodies resisted the cold better than weak ones. Plant foods were not forgotten. Roots, nuts, and berries were gathered in abundance during late summer and autumn. Some were dried, others stored in underground caches protected from freezing temperatures. These foods added vital nutrients and variety, preventing malnutrition during long winters. Balanced diets were understood instinctively, even without scientific explanation. Winter eating was deliberate. Meals were planned to conserve resources and maximize energy. Overeating early in winter could lead to starvation later. Undereating weakened the body and increased the risk of freezing. Elders often guided food distribution, ensuring fairness and long-term survival for the group. Food was shared, not hoarded, because one person's survival depended on the strength of the whole community. Hunting did not always stop in winter, but it became far more dangerous. Hunters tracked animals across frozen ground, reading subtle signs in snow and ice. Success meant fresh meat, but failure could mean exposure or injury. These risks were taken only when necessary. Stored food remained the backbone of survival. The act of eating itself became a method of warming. High-fat meals increased body temperature, especially before rest or sleep. Eating before sleep was common, allowing the body to generate heat through the night. Food was timed strategically, aligning nourishment with the body's needs in extreme cold. Children were taught early to respect food. Waste was unthinkable. Every part of an animal was used. Meat fed the body, fat fueled warmth, bones became tools, and hides provided clothing. Nothing was separated from survival. This respect for food ensured that resources lasted through the hardest months. Starvation was one of winter's greatest threats. Cold weakened the body, and hunger weakened it further. Native Americans understood that survival required maintaining strength, not just enduring discomfort. Food was medic. Protection and energy combined. Through careful preparation, disciplined consumption, and deep respect for resources, Native Americans turned food into a shield against winter. Even without abundant firewood, even when the land seemed lifeless, stored nourishment kept bodies warm and minds clear. Winter tested the limits of endurance, but food sustained hope. Each preserved meal represented foresight, effort, and the will to survive. When snow covered the earth and the sun disappeared for weeks at a time, the warmth that mattered most came not from flames, but from the nourishment carried within the body. Proof that survival begins long before winter ever arrives. In the deepest winter, when the land fell silent under snow and ice, survival was no longer an individual effort. It became a shared responsibility, woven tightly into the fabric of community. For Native American tribes, enduring months of freezing darkness without dependable firewood, unity was not a social choice, it was a necessity. Alone, a person could freeze, starve, or lose hope. Together, people endured. Families gathered closely during winter, often sharing a single shelter. This closeness was not accidental. Shared body heat made a measurable difference, raising interior warmth and reducing the risk of hypothermia. At night, people slept near one another, children between adults, elders protected from cold drafts. Warmth flowed from body to body, creating a living source of heat that no fire could replace. Community also meant shared labor. Before winter arrived, everyone had a role. Hunters gathered meat. Women processed hides and prepared food. Elders oversaw storage and taught younger generations what would be needed when snow covered the ground. Winter survival was planned collectively, with knowledge pooled and decisions made for the good of all. Elders held a special place during these months. They carried memories of past winters, harsh seasons, failed hunts, and successful strategies. Their experience guided choices about rationing food, traveling in storms, and recognizing danger signs in the cold. Stories were not entertainment, they were lessons. Each tale carried warnings and wisdom meant to keep the next generation alive. During winter, movement slowed and time was spent indoors. This created space for teaching. Children learned survival skills through observation and listening. They learned how to repair clothing, how to conserve energy, and how to respect food. These lessons ensured that knowledge did not disappear when winter claimed lives, as it sometimes did. Sharing food was perhaps the strongest expression of unity. When one hunter succeeded, the entire group benefited. Hoarding was dangerous, creating weakness within the community that could lead to loss for everyone. Food sharing strengthened trust and ensured that no one was left vulnerable to hunger and cold. Emotional survival mattered as much as physical survival. Winter isolation, darkness, and hardship could break spirits. Songs, rituals, and storytelling helped maintain morale. Laughter, remembrance, and tradition provided warmth that could not be measured. Hope became a resource, carefully preserved through community bonds. Even grief was shared. When winter claimed lives, the community mourned together. Loss was acknowledged, and strength was found in collective support. Survival was never guaranteed, but unity made endurance possible. Decision-making during winter was cautious and communal. Risky journeys were debated, resources were counted together. No one acted alone when consequences could affect everyone. This collective responsibility reduced fatal mistakes and increased resilience. Respect extended beyond people to the natural world. Winter was not cursed, it was respected. Storms were endured, not challenged. Animals were honored for the food they provided. The land was treated as a partner in survival, not an enemy. Through unity, Native Americans transformed the harshest winters into shared trials rather than solitary struggles. Community became shelter, warmth, and protection when firewood could not be relied upon. Survival was not achieved by the strongest individual, but by the strongest bonds. When spring finally returned and snow melted into flowing water, survival itself became proof of the power of togetherness. The lessons of winter remained, carried forward in stories and traditions, reminding future generations that even in the coldest darkness, people survive best when they stand together.